get an understanding of what part these different frameworks play or how they're seen by developers or users of the framework. And so I myself am in an interesting position, and that is because I entered the world of JavaScript because I wanted to create applications that had real-time communication. And so I jumped right into this really basically extraneous part of JavaScript, which is trying to get through DOM, basically trying to exploit browser hacks to have real-time communication. But what I didn't do is just jump in and learn all the AJAX frameworks. And so pretty recently I said, okay, I know JavaScript very well, but I want to know what people think about the other frameworks and how they're seen. And so we're sort of together on the same path here, getting into that kind of thing. Now, some of you may have already chosen an AJAX framework. You may already use it extensively. And so really this is just a chance for you to think of what questions you're going to want to ask our panelists next month. So with that in mind, I'll go ahead and get started. So AJAX stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Now this is maybe today slightly a misnomer, but it's basically true. I'll start with asynchronous. Asynchronous can have a lot of different meanings and a lot of different contexts. In the context of AJAX, what we mean is that while the user is interacting with the page, you can be doing something else in the background at the same time. Generally, that is getting data from a server. JavaScript is in there because you have to use JavaScript. JavaScript is the only script engine in the browser, or at least it's the only one in all browsers natively. And there have been lots of talk, since browsers started about putting other scripting engines in, but it's been JavaScript to date. And JavaScript has been getting a lot better and a lot faster, so it's not particularly a problem that it's JavaScript. And XML. Originally, when AJAX was first created, this is back in the days of, I guess when Microsoft was creating Outlook web edition of some kind, they needed some way to get data to the browser, and so they decided they were going to use the XML data format. Now, today, you don't have to use XML. In fact, many people don't. They use JSON or their own data format. JSON, though, is just a JavaScript object notation. It's just a way of sending objects that can easily be understood and evaluated by JavaScript. So in your mind, you can think of it sort of like AJAX P or something, AJAX J, because you've got AJAX and JSON. So there's two key parts to AJAX. The first is the XHR request, and I'm sorry if this is a review for some of you. The XHR request, the full name is XML HTTP request. And now, it's something slightly different in old versions of IE. I'm not going to put this here, but there's some ActiveX thing you can look it up. But as of IE 8 and onward, IE is back on track, or is now on track with the standard. So to create one of these things, you do new XML HTTP request. And then the next line is open, and that says that's a way of telling what resource we want to access and what method we want to use to access it. You have a few different ones. Get and post are the typical. And so we're going to get /foo. And then the last argument, true, is one of the keys here to AJAX. That's whether or not we want it to be asynchronous. So if we were to pass false in there, when we actually send this thing, if you look at the very last line, that's where we send it, this would be a blocking call. And so while we were waiting on data, the entire user interface would stop in most browsers. The way it's set up, they have a single thread for everything. So we have to pass true in there, but because it's asynchronous, we then need some way of knowing when this data was actually fetched. And so the lines there in the middle, xhr.onReadyStateChange, is where we attach a ready state handler. And what that means is we're listening for every time the ready state changes. It starts at 1 and goes to 2, then 3, then 4. What we care about is 4 because that means it's complete. The ones in between, like 2 and 3, 2 fires, I guess 2 fires when you have the status and possibly the headers, 3 fires when you have part of the response, and 4 fires when you have the entire response. So 3 might fire a number of times. But anyway, we only care when we actually get all the data back. So that's 4. And then once we get it all back, here in this example, I just do an alert and just show it to you. But in an AJAX application, you'd probably use the DOM. The DOM is the other cornerstone of AJAX. It allows you to manipulate, remove, or create page elements. So anything that's displaying on the page, that's HTML or CSS, you can manipulate. And so you can change just small pieces of the page to add functionality without actually having web navigation. And that's really the key here. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and continue. So I was just talking about the second cornerstone of AJAX, and it's the DOM. And it's that you can manipulate pieces of the page without actually going back to the server for a full page refresh. Now, you are going back to the server back and forth behind the scenes, but then what you're doing with that data you get is manipulating the DOM. So you can imagine an email application. In fact, Gmail, a very popular AJAX application. If you want to compose an email, you'd click compose, but you wouldn't actually make a page navigation to a different page. You wouldn't ask the server for a new HTML page. Instead, you'd use JavaScript to change the DOM. You'd remove, say, the inbox that was there before, and instead put in a compose mail panel. And then the user would type into that box, hi, how are you, what's up, or whatever, who they're sending it to, the subject, everything. Hit send. That would cause an XHR request behind the scenes to push the data up to the server so it could send the mail. It would get a reply back, like mail sent successfully, and then JavaScript would be used to change the DOM again to potentially return you back to your inbox, or take you back where you were before, or maybe show you the thread of messages, or whatever. But the key here is, for the most part, once you're in Gmail, you don't make actual page navigations. Now, there are a few interesting tricks that they've used in Gmail to make it seem like you can still hit back and forward, because that's one thing about AJAX, is that you can often lose the forward and back button. Well, in Gmail, they preserve back and forward by changing fragment identifiers in URL. This isn't very important, but the main point is that sometimes you can make it seem like page navigations are occurring, for the purpose of having forward and back, but they're not actually occurring. And very few page navigations will happen in Gmail. Another popular AJAX application was Google Maps, and everyone uses this. And you can remember back in the days when all you had was MapQuest. You showed a map, you had to click north, south, or northeast, or whatever, and then it would go back to the server, make a new map, and show you that one. With Google Maps, you don't do any of that. You just interact with the map directly. And they've got, say, the tiles cached around the current map view. So if you drag it to the right, it just brings up the tiles that are on the right and moves them in, and then recaches the tiles to the right of that. So this is just the review of what AJAX is. The implication here is that, of course, you have a better user experience, and the client is responsible for much more. Before, the server was in charge of getting the data from the database, assembling it into a view, and then delivering all that back to the browser. Now, the server is only responsible for getting the data for the most part and sending that directly back to the browser, just the data. Then the client code is responsible for taking that data and then turning it into something meaningful that the user can understand. This potentially can save you bandwidth because you're not actually, say there's a menu bar, you're not re-getting the content of that menu bar every single time you do a page navigation. But on the other hand, sometimes it can cause more bandwidth because you're able to make so many more requests while the user's just sitting there. So it's a toss-up and it's application specific. And of course, the obvious kind of elephant in the room is that you have to know JavaScript. You cannot make an AJAX app without JavaScript. Now, onto the toolkits and libraries. The API I showed you for XHR is pretty low level. And in fact, if you find yourself using the XHR API directly, you're probably doing something wrong. And you probably should have one of these toolkits. Now, the ones with stars next to them are those that are going to be on our panel. So overall, the toolkits I've listed here, Dojo, jQuery, Prototype, UE, MooTools, and X.js, are all very popular toolkits. And we're going to have Dojo, jQuery, UE, or YUI, and MooTools all at the panel. And so you can ask questions of people who've committed code directly to these projects or are running the projects. These are people who are very closely interacting with the project.